Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NRA 2017. Welcome to the Viridian Weapon Technologies booth. I am Matt Plowman, General Counsel here at Viridian, and my guest is Sabrina Karels, Attorney at Law for Riney and Mayfield out of Amarillo, Texas. Just to give a couple brief bios on ourselves, we're going to be having a legal liability discussion having to do with gun ownership and risks with guns. I am General Counsel for Viridian, which means I handle a variety of legal matters. Prior to that, I was with a large law firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota doing litigation. And I also have about 20 years of experience in insurance law, which it might not seem real important, but for some of the issues we're going to be talking about today, insurance is very significant. But let's welcome our guest of honor here. This is Sabrina Karels, and everybody give her a round of applause.
Oh, I'm really feel like kind of a bigger deal than I actually am right now. So I'm on the Legal Advisory Board for the USCCA, so I'm one of the attorneys that helps them to develop the program. I actually am a native Texan, in case any of y'all can't tell by listening to that. And I'm born and raised in Texas. I've been around guns my whole life. I have family in the firearms industry. I have family in law enforcement. And that's how I really got involved into the firearms law industry and getting involved with defending excessive force cases with the police department in shootings. And so that's how I got into it.
Okay. What are some of the other things you do in your practice that are of interest to NRA members?
So I'm a civil litigator, which means I represent people in civil lawsuits. I primarily work on the defense side. So when an individual or a business is sued, I will represent them in court through the course of the lawsuit. I do some other things too, counseling, recommendations for businesses to avoid legal issues that can come up. So that's really my background and experience. So if you were to be sued by someone because you discharged your weapon in self-defense, or if you had a negligent discharge at your range and you were sued, then I would represent those types of individuals and those types of lawsuits.
Great. Well, you should be providing a lot of great information then for everybody today. What we're going to do is talk about the various rights that gun owners have. First of all, as far as carrying your weapon, and we'll talk about rights having to do with when you're able to fire a firearm. And then we'll also talk about the ramifications if you end up unfortunate enough to be involved in a shooting, both from a criminal liability and both of our specialties, civil liability perspective. Before we go too much further, we can't have two lawyers up on stage without having some disclaimers. We do want to say that the information that we are giving is not to be considered formal legal advice. We're not forming an attorney-client relationship with anyone. If you end up in a shooting situation, we do strongly advise you to seek your own attorney who will be able to look at what happened, all of the specifics of your own case and the law of the state that you're involved in, which is an interesting point for Sabrina and I. Sabrina is from Texas. I'm from Minnesota, and those are two extremely different states as far as what gun laws are. So we'll be playing off each other a little bit and some of the specifics of the laws. Before we dig in here to our first topic, are there any questions that anyone any pressing legal questions that anyone has? And this is, by the way, for entertainment only, which is probably the only time I get to say that. The bad news is about lawyers is we love to talk and we like to hear ourselves talk. So if you don't stop us and ask a question, we could just keep going on and talking about tons of things. So we love to do that. Yeah, come on up, speak right into the microphone.
Some of the main gun laws differences between your two states, between Texas and where you're from.
Okay, well, I can start with Texas. Texas is a very favorable gun state. We have laws that allow you to defend your property with deadly force. We have laws that allow you to defend others with deadly force and, of course, yourself with deadly force. So that's a huge difference because in many states you cannot use deadly force to defend property. We've had specific instances that you may have seen in the news where someone who defended their property with deadly force with use of a weapon, and they were no-billed by the grand jury, which means that they didn't take the case, so there were no charges brought at all. Texas tends to be very favorable views towards gun owners in general. We just have open carry that came into place last year. And we were the 45th open carry state, which is, I think most people find unusual. They just assumed right off the bat that Texas would be open carry anyway, but we actually were not. And everybody kind of worried about that when it came into play, but it's really gone about very peacefully. There's been no adverse events reported in the news. So because of that, now we have a bill moving forward, which everybody will love this, called 1911, to become a constitutional carry state. And that may come to fruition. It's out of committee, which means that it's out of the committee that has drafted it, and it'll go to the House for vote. If it passes the House and it goes to the Senate, and then we have to, if it passes both, we got to have Governor Abbott sign it into law. I will caution you on that, though. Constitutional carry, that's a very good thing. But if you want to carry your gun in from Texas to travel into New Mexico or to Louisiana or someplace else, to maintain that reciprocity, to be able to carry your gun in those states, if it's allowed, you've still got to have a license. So if you're a traveler, you still need to get your license to carry.
Is Texas, you say open carry, is that permit or permitless?
It's permitted open carry. So right now they switch from a CHL in Texas to a license to carry. So if you have your license to carry, you can carry concealed or you can carry openly.
What about civil liability after a shooting in a legal shooting?
It depends on the state. Every state has very different rules. So in Texas, there's technically an immunity statute, but it's not an immunity that keeps you from getting sued. What it means is you could still be sued, then you have to prove that you were acting in justified force under the law to get your immunity. So you could still be sued. Anybody can go down to the courthouse, pay the fee, and file a lawsuit.
Yeah, I'm from Tennessee, near the Nashville area, and that's one of the things that they've got actually, I was involved in it. They're trying to pass, it was actually in the House last week, but with Tennessee's governor, there's some of these that's not going to pass, unfortunately, I don't think. You know, there were several others there, but with civil liability was one that they was really looking at, obviously, and they was looking at the constitutional carry too, but it didn't, I don't think that's going to go with it. And you say they do have that in Texas? The constitutional
They're trying
carry?
to pass.
No, they're trying to pass it right now.
That,
so
yeah.
we don't have it yet, and it's questionable whether it's actually going to make it all the way through to get passed. It's out of committee, which that's a big deal, just to get it agreed upon and out of the committee.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Your question about civil liability is a well-taken question. No matter what state you're in, you've always got the potential of being held civilly liable if you shoot someone, and even in self-defense. And so it's really just a question with states of how much they allow or what their standards are for self-defense.
I was just talking, once they determined it was a justified shooting, self-defense, like that.
Yep.
But they had, like, in cases of that happening, and shot, could a family member sue you, once it was determined all of that?
Yeah, some states do have, and we talked about this, I think, yesterday. Does Texas have that it's an automatic immunity if you are acquitted of the criminal charges?
No, Texas does not have that. So the civil immunity statute in Texas doesn't link it towards being acquitted or something like that to say, okay, you were affirmatively acquitted based upon acting in self-defense. Florida is a state that has that as an example. Some states have what they call immunity statutes, but they don't function that way to provide automatic immunity. You've still got to prove that you acted in self-defense. And there's a whole lot of things that you've got to show to do that. And then the way you show it is different on the civil side versus the criminal side. So 49 states, if you raise the plea of self-defense, then the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you weren't acting in self-defense.
And Sabrina, this is in a criminal context.
Yes,
correct?
this is in a criminal context. So
Right.
that's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a pretty high standard for the prosecution to prove. Now, there's one state, Ohio, is not within like the other 49 states. In a civil context, the burden of proof is preponderance of the evidence. And so it's a very different standard. And so if you look at that, there's lots of ways that people describe what does preponderance of the evidence mean? It means the greater weight and degree of credible evidence. So it's not that you have the most evidence, it's who has the most credible evidence. And then it comes down to just shades and degrees. 51% is enough to get you there. Okay, so if someone sues you, they just have to convince a jury by 51%. And so everybody looks at it as a scale. If I just tip it ever so slightly in my favor and I'm the plaintiff, then I win. I was at another trial and they used an example because we were during the Olympics, and they said even if you have to replay it in slow motion and just by that hair, I win by that 100th of a second. I have more evidence than they do. I win. My client wins. So it's a much different standard. And the reason for that is the law doesn't worry as much about forcing you to pay money as they do about putting you in jail. If you spend the rest of your life in jail, we want to make sure that they get it right. The law doesn't care as much when it comes down to money. So a lot of that depends upon whether you're someone that would be able to recover against in a lawsuit.
Does Texas offer, and it's getting to be more and more prevalent in a lot of states, and more than the last few years, as lawyers or certain lawyers offering specialty defense to carry permit holders?
Well,
And there's a lot of people, like, hey, I'll pay give me a yearly fee or whatever,
Right.
kind of like, it's kind of like reminds me of something the NRA is offering this year,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Sabrina, you are actually on the board of the USCCA, on the Legal Advisory Board. Do you want to just tell people, and we'll take some more questions as well, but talk a little bit about what that provides with the USCCA?
So the USCCA, the United States Concealed Carry Association, offers a program with tiered benefits that you can have that provide you monetary funds for criminal defense and also civil defense, and then civil defense coverage if you are found liable in a lawsuit, to have that money available there. So it functions a little bit like your car insurance. So you go and you hit somebody, and then you've got the insurance that's available there, plus the representation that they would pay for someone to do that. And so they will automatically write a check for a retainer for an attorney to represent you in the criminal context. And so there are various different programs out there available for that. Some of the things, I've actually written an article on this very thing, comparing different programs, and my evaluation was why I accepted being on the board of the USCCA, because I thought that they had a very good program. But when you look at these programs, I'll tell you some things to think about. The availability of the lawyers, how many lawyers do they have in their network, and do you get to pick your own lawyer? To me, as someone who does this for a living, I know the lawyers I want to represent me, and I want to make sure that if my life's on the line, I want the best possible lawyer that I can get. And so I'm going to ask my friends, even if I don't know a specific lawyer on that issue, I ask around and say, hey, who's the best guy in criminal defense in a self-defense shooting? And that's who I'm going to tell them, I want this person representing me, and will they allow you to do that and pay for that? The other question is it a reimbursement program, or is it something where they give you money up front to take care of that? Also, at the end of the case, it's important to find out if for whatever reason the prosecution has come after you so hard and they've got this one little fact that really hurts you, is it worth your while to take a plea to get out of it? And if you take that plea, have you forfeited all benefits? And that's an important question to ask as well.
Now, Sabrina, if somebody doesn't have an idea of who they would want to represent him, would an organization like this
Yes.
pick the lawyer for you as well?
So yes, if you if you don't have anyone that you know or someone specific that you would like to represent you, you want to make sure that they have a network of people available that are actually experienced in those things, that they could refer you to somebody so that you can, because one thing you want is you want an attorney on board right away. You don't want to have to wait until next week or a couple of weeks for them to get somebody to help you.
Do USCCA have lawyers in all states?
I believe so, yeah, and they're working on expanding the network. I'm in Amarillo, Texas, which is a fairly small market compared to, say, Houston or San Antonio, and they already have 2 lawyers on board in the criminal context there that are available to help people when they need it.
Now, Sabrina, one might say that if I have homeowners insurance, that provides liability coverage. How does a homeowner's policy compare with something such as the USCCA?
Yeah. I do a lot of insurance defense work, and I do a lot of work with insurance, and a lot of people, they may cover you for some active negligence that occurs in your home, but they may have an intentional act exclusion that prohibits the coverage under your homeowner's policy for an act of self-defense, which, even though is a justified act, is still considered intentional because you intentionally shot somebody as opposed to having a negligent discharge.
Right. Well, another key is another key
Totally
is that a
lost it.
homeowner's policy is not ever going to provide you with criminal defense.
Yeah.
With civil defense, it literally depends on the state that you're in, the insurance company that you have. There are many factors that go into it. There's the question of what's considered for a homeowner's policy to give you coverage. It has to be something that's considered an accident. That's how an occurrence under a homeowner's is considered. So even if it's a justified shooting, many states have ruled that it's not an accident. Some have ruled, however, though, that there can be coverage under your homeowner's policy. But
Well, thank you. I'm going to give somebody else a chance to ask some questions.
Of course,
Great,
thank
thank
you.
you.
I appreciate it.
so anybody, feel free to step up to the mic. You get a hat if you have any legal questions that are for entertainment purposes. But we are happy to talk about some of the issues that come into play with firearms here for the NFA members. For anybody that's just joining us, this is Sabrina Karels from Amarillo, Texas.
Amarillo, that's way up there. I'm down in San Antonio. So, fortunately, with one of your competitors, Texas Law Shield, but that's
Yep.
a good company as well. I'm going to go back to our.
Can you right into the mic? Yeah.
Okay, sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
That's okay.
That's okay.
I don't want to get my cooties all over this thing. But,
Yep.
I want to go back to and I know it's specific to Texas, but you said the bill was out of committee. Now, is that only on the House side?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not out of committee on the Senate side yet?
No.
Okay, so there's no conference yet. Are they going to do conference or?
I've been following that, and so it was a big success to get it out of committee.
Yeah, it was.
And so it's as far as I know, there's been nothing else that has occurred on it yet.
Yeah, I know it's not moving too well. I got a friend up there who's lobbying pretty hard for that,
Yeah.
so I just didn't know what the current status was and wanted to find out, even though it's kind of specific to just us. But anyway, I appreciate what you do, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you,
so
sir.
much.
And that's a good segue into the topic of, I think most people in the states they live in know whether they have a straight up permit to carry, which can be open or concealed, concealed permit, open permit. A lot of states are different. So most people know the law in their own state, but what are some things people should be looking for if they're traveling from state to state, interstate travel?
Okay. So different states with their concealed carry permits, you have to know whether the state that you're traveling into has reciprocity with your home state. If they have reciprocity, you still, though, have to comply with their laws, which means if you say, well, I didn't know I couldn't do that, they don't care because lack of knowledge of the law is never an excuse. So
Right.
what you can do is there's various programs, there's apps you can use, there's books you can use. The problem with the law is it's constantly changing, and so once you put it on paper, every week, it's a big joke. Once you put a law written down on paper, it's already out of date. So you still want to check and make sure that the laws that you have that you're looking at are current and up to date. So I have a book that I use, and so when I've traveled to Florida, I looked up Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida to make sure that as I was traveling through all those states, I was okay to have my gun in the car and to carry it on my person the way I wanted to carry it for those particular states.
Now then there's the Federal Transport Act as well that you some ability to move, to airports and things like that for layovers.
Yes. But, there are still some states that you have to be careful with because it's a running joke that they're, to New York, I just wouldn't even try. I wouldn't even,
right.
just don't do it. So there's a joke that somebody should create a business where you can store your firearm outside of that state. So if you're traveling across the country, lock your gun up, you go in, you do your visiting, you come back, you get your gun back, and then you go about your way so that you don't get in those sorts of trouble. I've actually have a friend who is an attorney who was put in handcuffs and taken down to the station and held because he made an inadvertent mistake and did not realize the law was as strict as it was. So.
Well, we heard another story about somebody in New York at LaGuardia who was detained, and it was also a lawyer, and he explained the federal transport law, and they said, well, federal law doesn't apply in New York.
Yeah.
It's funny to lawyers here. We're as entertaining as we can be. Well, let's move on here. Issue of self-defense rights is I think a real big one for gun owners. That's the reason many people have a gun is for self-defense. We hear a lot, and again, we keep mentioning that different states are different, and that is more than true in this topic. We hear about stand your ground laws that many states are trying to or have passed. We hear about the castle doctrine, duty to retreat, no duty to retreat. Can you just explain briefly kind of what those things mean?
Okay, sure. So, first I'll just give a little bit of background on the law of self-defense in general, and I'm going to give credit to my friend Andrew Bronca, who wrote the law of self-defense. But so you've got the 5 pillars that you have to have in order to have a justified shooting. You've got to be innocent, which means you can't pick a fight with somebody and then claim self-defense. It has to be imminent. So my fear that you're going to cause deadly harm to me or grave bodily injury to me has to be imminent. It can't be somebody who's 10 miles away from me and says, I'm going to come kill you. That's not enough. That's not an imminent threat. It has to be proportional. The force that you use in response to the threat has to be proportional to what the threat is.
So in other words, John out there, John Sheehan, if a little old lady came up to him waving her cane or something, it would not be proportional for him to shoot her.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be disproportionate force. And then let's see the next one. I'm sorry. Where did I leave off?
Reasonable. Well, it has to be a reasonable belief.
Yes. You have to be, and then it has to be. You have to exercise avoidance if you can. So I know that sounds like it conflicts with stand your ground, but it's really not. Yes, you have rights in many states to stand your ground. As long as you have a legal right to be there, then you don't have to flee. There's no duty to retreat. But under most circumstances, the jury's going to look at you and say, would a reasonable person try to have avoided this whole incident? And then the final factor is reasonableness. And in the law, we call that the reasonable man. So who's a reasonable man? Well, you're a reasonable man. You're a reasonable man. Maybe.
Not really in court, I'm not. But
or a reasonable woman. And so what happens is when you're up there defending yourself in front of 6 people or 12 people, depending upon what your state is, it's 12 people who don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They may know nothing about guns. They may never even carry a gun in self-defense. So what they're instructed is, what would a reasonable person do under those circumstances? Right. And it has to be the same or similar circumstances. So all of those factors that you were looking at when this event occurred are all relevant to determine whether your actions were appropriate. How big the person was, what the threat was, how imminent the threat was, how close was this person to you? Did you have a history with this person where the prosecution may say, you guys were in mutual combat. You weren't engaged in self-defense. You have a history together. So all of those different things will come into play.
So that's one of the key things is, if you ask the question, who determines if you were reasonable? Who determines if a threat was imminent? Who determines if you were proportional? Who is that?
A jury.
It's a jury, which might be made up of some NRA members, but there's also plenty of people that may be on a jury, depending on where you are, that are not. And so I think as we talk about castle doctrine, stand your ground, you still have to be able to show that you were reasonably facing an imminent threat, even if you're able to stand your ground.
Yes.
Right.
And one thing that I'll point out is every location is different, and that's why it's so hard for us to give you any specific realities of the situation. Even in Texas, I can tell you that where I'm at, Potter County and Randall County are very conservative juries, which means that they don't like to award a lot of money, and that means on the criminal side in a self-defense shooting case, they're going to be more conservative leaning, meaning that they're going to support your right to use your gun in self-defense.
Right.
If you end up going to a place like Travis County or Bear County or way down south.
Or many places in Minnesota or states around us.
Hidalgo County in Texas is considered a judicial hellhole, and what that means is that it's very favorable to plaintiffs, which means they're going to be very favorable to not exercising self-defense. So then, yes, Minnesota, all of those things are going to make a difference as to whether or not you're potential liable for your actions and whether you would be held criminally responsible.
So and let's talk about the unfortunate fact if you've had to pull the trigger in self-defense or what you truly believe to be self-defense. If you do that, I think it's important to know that if you shoot someone in self-defense, you're not just going to be able to move on with the rest of your day, right? I mean,
right.
So what can someone expect if they're in that unfortunate situation? What is going to happen next? What things should they think about doing?
Well, the first thing is, if you've ever experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome or you've been in an event where it really takes all of your feelings away from you, most people are not going to know how to respond because they've just been involved in something where their hands are shaking, they can't breathe, their heart's racing, and so it's really hard to tell somebody this is what to expect on that end. Physically, emotionally, it's going to be very traumatic and very difficult. Then you're going to probably be questioned by the police, taken down to the station. If you have a prosecutor who thinks, I don't believe you, I don't believe the way you say things happened, then they're going to try to get you indicted, taken before the grand jury if you get indicted, and then you're going to have your right to a speedy trial, which could take...
Which isn't that speedy, though, is it, in most cases?
It's much speedier than in the civil context, so you could still looking at a few months. And I will tell you, based upon representing people for 20 years, the process of being involved in any type of legal process is very stressful. I've had people that tell me I'm never doing my job again because I can never go through this again. It's a very stressful
Why do you think I have
process.
no hair? So one of the questions that comes up is in that immediate aftermath, and you're going to be shaken up, you're going to be very upset. The police ought to be coming to the scene. If you have to call them yourself, the police need to be there right away. There's the question of, do you exercise your Fifth Amendment right and say nothing? Or do you at least tell the police officer that this person came after me, this person was threatened me with a gun or broke into my house? And there's debate, there's no right or wrong answer, but what's your thought on that issue? And
I will say this, there's no good answer, okay, because I have sat in a room with 12 different lawyers, and they all had different opinions on this. And the one thing that we can agree on is if you're going to say something, you need to say as little as possible. And if you're one of those people that under stress, you get very stressed and you start talking a lot, then you should not talk at all. Because the minute you start talking, you're going to want to say a lot and many things, and you're going to want to keep talking. If you're someone who functions well under pressure and you can remember what you were told in your class or what your lawyer told you should say, then say that and then stop talking. Right. We just had a presentation by Mas Ayub, who is incredible. If you get an opportunity to take any of his classes, you should do it.
And he will be on the stage later today.
Yes, he is amazing, and you should listen to him definitely. So what he says is, call and identify yourself, tell him that there's been a shooting, and then basically stop talking.
Well, I think, and that the person came after you, or that the person, someone attacked you, and then I'm happy to cooperate with an investigation, but I need to talk with a lawyer.
And here's his theory on that. Police, when they approach a situation, they are used to seeing things in the context of who's a victim and who's the perpetrator. And the person holding a gun tends to look like a perpetrator. So you have to dissuade them of that immediate notion that you're someone who did something wrong by giving them at least enough information for them not to assume that you were the person starting the whole event and that you weren't the person acting badly, so to
You
speak.
set the tone of the investigation out of the start. So-
But in general, I will tell you that in representing people, people do tend to talk too much. They just do. When they get asked questions, they don't stop talking like they should. And so it's very difficult, and that's why many of us disagree with that and think, I get it, I get what you're saying, but please don't say very much and put yourself in a bad position until we can get there and help you out and to help you get through that process.
Right. For those of you just joining us, I have Sabrina Karels here, a member of the USCCA Legal Advisory Board, attorney in Texas. So we're talking about anything and everything having to do with legal issues of gun owners and gun rights. Does anybody have any questions? We're coming near the end here, but does anybody have any questions? Just step up to the mic. You might get a hat out of the deal.
Well, if I
Speak
will
right
get-
into the mic. Yep.
Yeah, I've never done that before. So, yes, I want the cap. Thank you very much for offering that, for being the one to step up. Number two, thank you for telling people not to answer a question, because I was a police officer, and I know for a fact all they're trying to do is put you in jail. I know a district attorney that's trying to rack up. I got a question coming, don't worry.
No,
I got
I'm
a
good.
district attorney that I personally know. His goal in life is to rack up a certain number of years of people in jail.
What state are you in?
Georgia.
Okay.
And so, don't say anything. I mean, when I did the VR thing over here for the NRA, when the guys came in and they're trying to ask me a question, I just kept saying, "Screw you, I want a lawyer. Screw you, I want a lawyer." But the legislation that's been promised at the last NRA for the hearing protection safety, and it is a big thing, and I do appreciate the Trump brothers for working on this. They're great guys. Have you heard anything? Do you know anything? Do you have any idea what direction any of that's moving in? Because all the other legislation's bogged down, and we haven't heard anything about that.
I have not. I've not, unfortunately, heard more than you have.
I think it's in committee, and I think it's just a matter of priorities at the moment. But I think ultimately it will get passed. I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Well, the only other thing I would say is everybody needs to learn as much as they can from you, ma'am, because when the worst happens, they're thinking people are going to come in and say, "You're a big hero," but regardless, they're going to put the cuffs on you and take you down. You're going to sit before the man. You're going to sit in the fish tank, and you're going to have to answer questions. And thank you for informing people.
I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Oh, come on up.
Hey, how you doing? My quick question is...
Yeah, right into the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's
not if you discharge your firearm. What about brandishing? Should you go about the same way with not answering any questions, waiting to a lawyer? Because the same thing like that
Great
gentleman
question.
says, end of the day, we answer or not, they're going to go, well, I've got two witnesses. Could have fell out of your pocket. You could have actually been in an aggressive event and then just been like, they de-escalated it, but someone else saw it and was like, So is that the same deal, just like stay quiet when it comes to brandishing?
That's a great question,
Look,
Sabrina.
my personal opinion is still say as little as possible. I mean, if you're sitting there and you think that you're being asked questions in a manner that's going to lead to something, then you should probably not talk. And say very little as possible. So the brandishing is an interesting issue because brandishing means different things to different people. If I'm at a baseball game and I reach up and my shirt pops up and someone sees my gun, is that brandishing in your state? In Texas, that's no longer brandishing.
Right.
Okay, but in your state, it might be.
Not
But then
anymore.
there's also brandishing if you feel threatened and you put your hand on your gun or you pull your gun out. In most cases and in many states, that's considered an assault. Okay, you put somebody in fear of injury or life, even though you didn't do anything. So, and in that circumstance, that's a whole different charge than what may be a misdemeanor brandishing charge.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And you can face civil liability for assault also if
Yes.
somebody has emotional distress from having the gun pulled on them or something like that. So, well, we appreciate that question very much. We are running out of time here. We're near the end. So I just want to thank you, Sabrina. I think you've been terrific. Let's everybody who's around give Sabrina a round of applause. And she is with the firm of Riney and Mayfield
Yes.
in Amarillo, Texas, and with the USCCA Legal Advisory Board. So you can probably track her down and find her with any other legal questions that come up. So
I appreciate it. I thank everybody for listening and for your time. I'll be walking around the show today. I'm happy to talk to you then. The one thing I would say is I'm just going to close with this. Our Second Amendment right is something very precious and very special. We should be responsible in how we exercise those rights and the way that we represent ourselves, because that right is greatly threatened right now. And every time someone does something that looks poorly on gun owners, it reflects on all of us as a whole. So I just encourage everybody to be responsible, even if it's just in a joking manner. Don't make jokes about killing people or shooting people. You may mean nothing by it, but it comes back to look not only poorly on the rest of us, but if something does happen with you and somebody says, well, look, you joked about killing people, this is a big joke to you. Those are the types of things that can come up in legal actions that then make our jobs harder to help you, even if you're a really good person. So I appreciate
Excellent.
it. Thank you so much.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.